online or in person. I'm sure we'll build the attendance as the year goes on. And I'd like to start with a prayer, and the prayer I'm going to pray here actually comes from the liturgical prayer of my church, the Byzantine Church. The reason I'm selecting it is because we're within the feast day, the holy day of the Nativity of the Mother of God, both East and West. In our church, it's a big deal. And the prayers I have, as you'll hear, are once again an example of the spousal nature, the spousal character of the prayer of the church. Okay. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let us play the spiritual flute on this noteworthy feast, because from the seed of David is born the mother of the life who dispels the darkness. She is the renewal of Adam and the answer to Eve, the source of incorruption, the transformation of corruption. Because of her we have been divinized and delivered from death. We cry out to her with Gabriel, "Rejoice, O full of grace, the Lord is with you. Because of you he has granted to us great mercy. You have remained a virgin before and after childbirth, O Lady. Your womb has become a holy table, like a bridegroom coming forth from his chamber. Christ the Son has come forth from you." In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, I have a little review sheet, and because to bring us up to kind of a review of some of the main points, not all of them, we'll have more, but these are some of the main points that we were talking about last year. And we're going to continue this season on the part of the book that starts to get very, very interesting. It's only a dream. It starts to get very, very applicable. It gets deep into now relationship and so on. Yes. Yeah, we're still in love and responsibility. And we're going to pick it up, actually, for those of you who have this copy, a Ignatius Press copy, on page 174, called The Metaphysics of Shame. And from there on out, this season, you're going to see we're going to do a lot of work in this book that is very applicable to the nitty-gritty, the real questions of relationships and so on. But what we were doing up to this point was building a foundation, and as John Paul II does, metaphysically and psychologically and so on. In other words, going through all these terms, what love is and so on. And so I kind of made a bit of a summary of it in this handout sheet. So we'll go over that first, then we'll continue on. So basically the message of this book, really, just the basic message, essentially that human beings are persons, and the only honest and appropriate response to a person is an authentic, integrated love and responsibility. Hence the name of the book. A person, see the definition of person, again, words are very important. Person means something that's essentially modeled after God. God is being. He is perfect being. It's from him that we get the definition of things like being and person. So a person has will, has intellect, can transcend themselves, is open to the transcendence, has a spiritual destiny, a spirituality to them. There's a huge gap between a person and a creature, in other words, an animal. Although we have similarities, there's a huge, huge gap. And it has to do with the person. So our response to the person is very, very unique. It's very, very kind of codified. And that is the only way is love and responsibility. You cannot do anything less than that. To be honest, to be true, to be just. Because the opposite of that is using, or the utilitarianism. There's various forms of using, and it's unfortunate. It's often what happens in relationships in our world today, and what we understand or define as love. And there are various stages and forms of love which make up the raw material of love. So he talks a lot about that, like raw material. But real love itself is not just the raw material. And the tendency and the mistake we make in our culture is that we kind of stop at the different levels or at the raw material itself, and we kind of identify love with that. And love is not just the raw material. It includes all the raw material. It must include it. But love is more than just any one part of the so-called raw material or stages of love that we'll see. And we're all vulnerable to that. As a culture, because we live non-sacramentally, we separate church and state. We live very dichotomously. Here's the holy and God here, the mystical, the real of everything. And here's day-to-day life over here, the real world. And we have this big bipolar dichotomy that we live in. Whereas truth is in always the both and, in putting the two together, that our day-to-day world finds its reality. The real world is what the day-to-day stuff points to or participates in, which is the things of the next life, the things of God. So you have to have both. I think it's a mystical approach, which sees basically it connects the two worlds, the world beyond and our world here. But we're vulnerable to that, to this sort of dichotomous view of life because of original sin. And in the case of relationships and love and sexuality, that of course manifests itself in concupiscence. In other words, our fallen nature, our out of control passions, our wounded passions. And also because our deepest desire, which we can use the word eros in the right way, eros, our striving for God, that's the most real thing about us, because we're made in God's image and likeness, so that's what we desire most. And so because we desire it, our tendency is to want it right away, to grab at that which seems to be love, that which is most immediate. And this is how we end up stopping at the raw material. Okay, so what is love? Love, in the summary here, a couple summary points, and I highlighted the words, the vocabulary of John Paul II in this love and responsibility. It's both in the section on the metaphysics of love and the psychology of love. I kind of put them together as a summary. Love is always a mutual relationship between persons. Emphasis on the word mutual and persons. As we'll see, this word mutual implies the word reciprocity, which is a very big word in John Paul's teaching, and a very big word in my favorites in love and the whole world of love and sexuality. So it's mutual. It has to be a mutual sharing of the two. It's not just one-sided or more than one than the other. And it begins with attraction. When we see something, oh, I like that. I love that. But the attraction between man and woman is directed at at perceived values. In other words, I like you. That attraction is because I see some kind of value. I'm sensing some kind of value in you. The value is on two levels. One, the value of you as a woman or as a man. Whereas a man perceives in a woman not just that she is, her characteristics, qualities he likes about her, that she's beautiful, but he's attracted to the value of her femininity itself. Because by nature, the male sees the female and sees in the female the value called femininity and all that means. Yeah.
Would you say that you hear people talking about femininity and masculinity outside of human existence, like maybe like the eternal feminine or the divine feminine or whatever? And I just strongly relate that of course there is a feminine like an animal, a feminine plant. Of course in a person it means something so different, something so much more.
That's the other part of it. The attraction should be is to the value of femininity and masculinity, but also, above all, it ought to be, first and foremost, the value to them as a person for their own sake. In other words, I am attracted to you, or find you attractive, first and foremost as a person. Now that person is incarnated or manifested, comes through, as it were, is made present in a masculine or feminine dimension. So yeah, there is an eternal feminine or masculine in the sense that that's the spousal mystery. There is
And it's found outside of human beings.
right found outside.
I don't think we could say it's an animal. There's male and female animals, but I don't think we say it's masculinity and femininity. That might only describe the person.
Yeah, she's saying, is there masculinity and femininity in animals? There's maleness and femaleness, but can it be ascribed only to person? Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Yeah, too bad John Paul's not around. Right? Yeah.
Okay, there's masculinity.
You do see the difference though in animals, like in the dogs, a male, female dog. Yeah. Yeah.
The males are beautiful. The males are hot.
Yeah.
The attract the woman.
Yeah.
But it's analogous. As John Paul II says, it's only analogous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Yeah, femininity. Yeah, because femininity it's a whole world of what we call connectedness, relational, warmth, tender, nurturing. The whole order of life and love. Receptivity, of course, above all, receptivity, and of course the mass. This really gets into the theology of the body. But yeah, there's a fundamental. We made the word also complementarity to the whole created order. That's what theology of the body, the whole thing, theology of the body is based on, and how really everything's based on is this. That's why he calls the spousal mystery the fundamental element. You have basically this fundamental, and it comes from the most fundamental thing of all, God. Here's God, there's creation. He moves towards creation in love, and enters into an intimate relationship. Okay, there's your in a sense masculine, feminine, on its fullest archetypal level. Not that God is a man, but the action, the ethos, the character is in what we would see analogously as masculine. The act of moving outward from some place towards something. And then that other thing, receiving that action, that would be the feminine. So if you look at it, that's the DNA, I like to call it the DNA of all creation. And that's why it's so easy for me, at least personally, and I hope it'd be easy for everyone, to speak. I call it spousalese, the language of spousalese. Yeah, spousalese, where you actually do see this everywhere, and you can connect everything in this one fundamental reality. And that's the great threshold I believe we have to cross. That's what the theology of the body calls us to cross, especially in our sexuality. And that's the threshold that a lot of people are afraid to cross. The well-meaning people, and also people just, they're non-secular, they're secular, but also people who are very faithful, but certainly consider themselves very faithful Catholics or interested in pure of heart. Many of them have trouble seeing everything in that light. They see that they can't quite imagine speaking in the terms of sexuality and in the terms of the divine in one breath. But that's precisely what has to happen, because that's the reality of it. Our sexuality is our participation in the divine. That's what it makes it, at least in its origin, in its essence, holy. That's what makes it holy. Okay, so, we could go on with that. Okay. Okay, so an attraction. Now that attraction, we said, right, it's the value of a person and to their femininity. And this attraction can include, it's either, it's on the sensual level, or sort of the physical attraction, and on the sentimental. And he talks about how the sensual is a little more, the male is a little more prone that way. and the female is a little more prone towards the sentimental. In other words, the feeling, the appreciation of the masculine person, the masculine sense in the person. The female is a little bit more connected that way. The male is a little more connected towards the sensual. In other words, the female body. And I don't mean in a banal way. I mean, it's just the way that the two are kind of programmed in terms of how they're perceived. So it's sensual and sentimental. But naturally, you cannot stay at either one of the levels. And every time we have a term here, every time we have a level, you'll notice that, think of how often we stop at that level. That becomes love for us. So that's what unites the body. I remember talking to a married couple one time. We're very, very faithful Catholics now. And in fact, the man is a deacon. And they were talking about when they got married and they first got together. And they said, they admitted, yeah, there was a lot of physical attraction dimension to our relationship. In other words, it kind of started there, not purely on that, because they were both always faithful Catholics and good people, but there still was a lot of that, and they kind of admitted that. Yeah, that we were physically attracted to each other. That was that. But see, they were able to. That's part of the raw element. It's okay. It's all right. See, we're not condemning it. He doesn't condemn these things. This is all great. But yet, just remember, it's just a part of the raw material. You don't stop at the raw material. You notice that that's something that, again, with every one of these things, you'll see it reflected in other aspects of our culture and society. Like we stop at raw material with a lot of things. Like, for instance, even though I enjoy it too, to a large extent, let's take just the name, rock music. Rock music, if you look at that, it's very, very raw. It's basic. In other words, it's not highly developed. It has a basic kind of, that's its whole, I guess you call it popular or genius or intent, is to be very basic. Or like blues, it's very, it's like two chords basically back and forth. Don't really work it down. Okay. Art, abstract art. I know because I went through art school and all. I know all that this stuff. And I look at what they did was they were kind of making the raw thing the art, reducing things down to their most basic components and putting emphasis even on nowadays you find this in art, architecture, they call it the integrity to the material, where the material itself, like design a church, and they make it out of brick or whatever, but they won't put anything on the wall, no icons or statues, because they say, oh, the brick has its own integrity, so you can't touch that. Well, it does, but it's a raw material, which calls to be further enhanced. You notice that in our speaking, the way we speak, texting now? Think of it. Our whole orientation is reducing down and making the raw material the ultimate thing. See, in all these things, when it comes to love, sexuality, all these things, you notice that these things, any one term or aspect you want to talk about, you'll see that they're all part of a basic orientation, and you'll see it woven through every other aspect of our culture. When I do a talk on contraception, I call it the contraceptive worldview. And I go through all the ways in which we contracept in our approach to life. It's not just what you're doing in a bedroom so you don't have kids. That's sort of the source and summit of it. But we came to contracept in the bedroom because we came to a contraceptive worldview, which is replete through everything we do. So the same thing here. The raw materials are not the thing itself. They are part of it. Okay, we don't put them down. They're essential elements of it. Okay, the attraction makes an impression, he says. An impression. Like, oh, you made an impression on me. I like you, or I don't like you, or I feel some titillation or something. And this is accompanied by an emotion, which itself is in course relation to a value. So we feel something because of the impression made. An impression made upon us by the value we're perceiving. And this is then what we call the level of sympathy or empathy, the emotional level. This is one of the big levels a lot of people stop at. girl meets boy, boy meets girl. They like each other, and so they feel something for each other. They like that feeling, and it becomes sort of frozen at that level, the feeling, which of course opens itself wide open to later on the disappointment and the breakup whenever the feeling starts to wane or change.
I have a problem reading about sympathy because I kept thinking of sympathy as something or a comedy or a coordinate or helpful, as
Yeah,
sympathy.
yeah.
What I mean is
Hmm.
where somebody is poorer than you or less off than
Right,
you, or you
right.
have this feeling of sympathy he writes about. So that there's a waker that you go and you on my little card that I gave the teams, I changed the word to empathy, but that was wrong, and I have to change it back because empathy is only in the mind. You can
Yeah,
imagine what someone else feels. You don't actually feel. Sympathy is you feel what the other person feels. And it's
right.
mutual, so nobody's higher or lower than the other. So it goes both ways. Or it's not dominated in the feminine. Or
No,
it
no.
goes both.
Right.
Sympathy. I have to get erased from my mind. I know, it's a weird word, and I
Yeah.
changed it. I shouldn't have because I changed the whole meaning. Empathy, because I thought empathy was a stronger word. It's actually a weaker word. Empathy is only in the mind. And sympathy is the whole meaning.
Yes, as he says here, we're using some of the Latin. The word sympathy is of Greek origin and is formed from the prefix syn. Oh, I'm sorry, page 88, the bottom, from sympathy to friendship. The question for those who are tuning in is about this word sympathy, trying to reorient our idea of it as applied to love. The bottom of page 88. We must now look at human love. I'll go for the last sentence. The word sympathy is Greek origin and is formed from the prefix syn, together with, and the root of the verb pathein, to experience. So to experience together. Literally, then, sympathy means no more nor less experiencing together. The literal meaning of the expression points to two aspects of sympathy. Okay, I'm going to read down the bottom of that paragraph on page 89, the first paragraph, the last sentence. Sympathy is love at a purely emotional stage, at which no decision of the will, no act of choice, as yet plays its proper part. At most, the will merely consents to the experience of its sympathy and the direction it takes. So basically, what he's saying, that sympathy is basically, we call it the mutual feeling level. They both feel something for each other. It's not just one-sided, it's two-sided. It's basically a feeling. But sympathy then, the next level then would have to give rise to friendship. Okay, we not only just feel mutually for each other, but we also now share things with each other. We sort of do things with each other. Now, friendship, I hear a lot of people say it today, like couples today, married couples. Oh, my spouse is my best friend. Or we need to start out as, we end up friends or start out as friends. Whatever. I've heard that even with divorced couples. Like, yeah, ever since we got divorced, we're the best of friends. You should have done that while you were married. You should still be married. See, they had to actually, they had a divorce, like come out of the whole marriage venue in order to rediscover these aspects of true love that should have been in there at the beginning, but they didn't know. So friendship, shared experiences and interests, and so now, and friendship then has to develop into benevolencia, being benevolent. In other words, willing the good. Now, willing the good is where, at this level, is where that reciprocity comes in, which is one of my favorite terms or concepts in love. In fact, I just did a homily at a wedding last week, and I actually had the bride and groom demonstrate this. And them stand towards each other, facing each other, and press their palms together, and just kind of lean into each other. And as they lean, as one lean towards the other, in other words, move in the direction of the other, and one moved in the direction of the other, they could be mutually supportive and strong. The bond was strong. You know, nothing's if you press your palms to mine, like if I press towards you, that nothing can break that. You know? But if one moves not towards the other but towards himself, then you have a potential collapse. Or neither one does, then you'll have no bond. So this willing of the good means I look and I choose. This starts to get to the highest level of love, really. What really defines love, real love, and that is I will. Will means I orient myself towards the good of the other. I like to use the term best for the other. And that's a great term for understanding not just relational love, man and woman love, but Christian love. Just real love in all cases. But it's especially helpful in marital love because sometimes whenever I work with married couples, one of the things I'll do is I'll have them look at just being. I'll take them back to the basics, and I'll say to the husband, is she a Christian woman? Forget she's your wife right now. Is she a Christian woman? Is he a Christian man? Okay, real simple question. Before you get into all the hurts and expectations of marriage, how does a Christian man treat a Christian woman, and vice versa? Are you doing that? Aside from everything else, are you doing that? It's not that we start, well, of course they're not. So now we start to do that. And while doing that, we then work on the relational things. And what is a Christian? I will the best of the other. It's not, what about me and he did this to me and she this. It's no matter what they're doing or not doing, how can I make a move in the direction of what is best for them? And even if they're, you're being abused, you're the whatever, the other one is not cooperating, whatever, you seem to be the victim, whatever, still that principle, if you practice that principle, it will take you beyond that victimhood. Because sometimes, for instance, doing the best for the other is refusing to be a victim and taking whatever steps are necessary for that. So you live by that principle. What is best for the other? And then finally, yes, exactly, and that's that reciprocity. And the thing about it, reciprocity is, you're right, sister, to be best for you. What is best for me, I will get what is best for me by only seeking what is best for that person. Now, a lot of people, there's a certain scare in there, a fear of like, well, wait a minute, that sounds like so one-sided. What if they're not, that's usually, I get the response usually, well, what if the other person isn't doing that? Regardless, then you still choose what is best for them, which would mean choices you make that make sure it's not one-sided, that you're not victimized by the one-sidedness. You understand? It's not just, it's a very big difference, although it doesn't seem that way at first. There's a very big difference between making it all about the other person and being codependent and a victim. There's a world of difference. It's like that movie, the Quiet Man. Remember John Wayne? Remember that, sister?
I know he do, what's the name? O'Hara.
No, it was actually she was very, very what's the B word? She was very, very like that, feisty. Yeah, feisty. I use that word. Yeah, she was very feisty. Seriously, the other weird word would describe it. It was just, that was the whole thing. And he was actually a former boxer. He was like a tough guy, but he was very, since after his career, he was very, very controlled. He would not be aggressive like that. And he just kept taking this and taking this and taking it, and she was just totally out of line. And finally, he just like literally picks her up physically and on her shoulder and takes her and sets her down, and there's this whole scene where he just really straightens her out, and yeah, and she does turn around. she turns around. Again, he held off. But what was best for her was that she had to be treated that way. It wasn't an abusive thing. It was more like at least as I remember the movie, it was more like this is what she needed. It worked. Anyway, so again, that's doing what was best for that person. He tried being, the patient one and taking the hits, but that's not what was needed for her growth, for her development, her maturity. And then they had a good relationship after that. So. Yeah, yeah. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Oh. What is it?
The book.
Mm.
You know what I've done, and I've been working with the 16 stages of life. I really think, we don't teach young people anything. Again, the most important thing in life is we learn. And when I was growing up, nobody's ever taught me. My parents, not TV, not school, not a word. I know some places do have programs, that do have curriculum, whatever, but so of course, what are they going to do? Just instinct, whatever they think is best.
Yeah.
So what I've done is, because it's 6 is a bad number, 6 is an impressive number. So I've made it 7 stages: attraction, desire, sympathy, friendship, goodwill, and then you get to true love. And then maybe you get to betrothed love.
Is it this one here?
Yeah, I have to fix this up.
Oh, okay. Is that yours?
Yeah.
You did that?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I got that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, in fact, I was looking at it. I was studying, doing comparing it, and I just sort of.
What are they? Attraction,
desire,
sympathy, friendship,
oh,
goodwill. Of course, we explain what these things mean.
Yeah.
And then true love. Because a lot of people say to me, well, this applies to me and my friend, my girlfriend, a girl on girl, and boy to boy. And I'm like, yeah, but not betrothed love. Right. Betrothed is 10. Yeah, 7. And I think sometimes the best thing, even though you're at true love, for some reason you're not going to be able to get married. The best thing for both of you is to walk away for whatever reason.
That's interesting. Oh, now I wonder why. That's where that explains the empathy. I saw empathy, and it was you who did that. I didn't get this from you. I got this from talking to you down the south.
I was there at Springfield.
Oh, Springfield. That's where it is. Yeah. Okay. It was from you. I thought it was from the people that hosted. Okay. I was wondering where they.
I miss seeing her hands flying as she thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's another. I asked the kids a question one time from Joliet, and I was like, "How are we going to do that? How are we going to get to true love?" And it was already been spoken. And I said, "Let's do this thing up."
Good. Yeah.
BP2 stages of love. Yeah.
And
but I have to fix this only 6.
What I did was the reason why I ended at betrothed love was because I guess I'd probably use the word spousal. In other words, a gift of self, basically.
I think BP2 has this 6.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. So betrothed love, which is also an integrated love, another big term. Integrated means love is not just an experience, no longer just an experience, as rich as it is, but it's actually a virtue. And you live love. And as he says, it relies on the primary elements of the human spirit, freedom and truth. In other words, we love not because we are compelled, we don't do anything out of compulsion. Oh, but I really, really feel it. I couldn't help myself. I fell in love. No, that's not freedom. Freedom means we freely choose it. Yes, because we feel these things and we have friendship and sympathy and all that. But we choose it and we live it according to truth, to what real love is. So freedom and truth, which, as we saw when we talked about the other issues over the past couple of years, especially when it gets into those really hot button issues today, the same-sex attraction, all that, that truth, freedom, compassion, only comes by way of truth. So we must have truth in order to be free and truly compassionate and real integrated love. Integrated means it takes all this together, integrates it with virtue. In other words, living this love, not just feeling it, but living it by choice, conscious choices to do what is right, to be honest to what love is. It's mutual, it has that reciprocity, it is sympathetic, it is sensual. Yes. Yes. Betrothed love is body and soul, which is why in marriage this occurs. Can only occur. It's unique to a relationship of male and female, because that's the only way you can have that complete sharing and interpenetration, as John Paul II would say, interpenetration of the two persons, psychosomatic interpenetration. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. There's a lie. Yeah. Cohabitation.
They always say, you're not really married until you've consummated your marriage. So wouldn't you say that even these cohabiting couples once they get married, they haven't consummated their marriage yet.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever they were doing before was not marriage. It
right.
wasn't their consummation. So in a sense, they get to start over.
Right.
Did you say that?
Yeah.
And maybe if they can be helped to see that okay, you didn't realize that you're making a mistake.
Yeah.
Living together was a big mistake all along, no matter how good it felt, no matter how good you get along. But now that you're married, it's new. It's new. Having sex is different now. It is something new and something different.
Yeah.
Did you say that?
Mm-hmm.
So even though they've had and years of sex together, they haven't consummated a marriage yet.
Right.
So they have sex after they get married. So it is going to be something new and different, and I think it's a real positive life for them.
Yeah, it's a good point to teach them that when you have relations, it's going to be very different.
Even if it might not feel different, the reality has changed.
And this is probably one of the reasons why in marriages that I've experienced, the couples that are most nervous about marriage, the wedding day, are the ones that had been living together.
Why? They don't come to the church, or they're not sure that they try it, maybe they go to mass on Sunday, they want to go back, but they're away
Mm-hmm.
they're moving out of the church. And it's hard to help them, connect themselves back in.
You mean?
Because of the guilt, because of everything that they know. They're stamped with the same stamp. We are a stamp, knowing that this is not immoral. Okay. So, but they don't know why. They really don't know why. They don't know why. And also because they're not interested in church. That's why they're not going to church, because they're not interested. They might want a church wedding or something, but what is having a church wedding going to affect the rest of their life? They don't want to go to church on Sunday morning. They don't understand their faith and haven't lived it. So why should they? I think it's even bigger than marriage. They're not leading the sacramental life. It doesn't mean anything. They haven't been well catechized. They haven't seen maybe their parents living the faith. So why should a church wedding suddenly change everything and make them, I want to go to church. I want to get up early on Sunday morning and go to the wedding. That would be a really
Can the people online hear the discussion?
No, I'm trying to type.
Okay. I see. You're right. Okay, that's all right. Yeah, we're talking about this question of couples cohabitating, living together, and what becomes of them, and why they do that, and why they oftentimes don't return to the church, and things to tell them and teach them that might be instructional but encouraging. And one of the things Sister Elena was saying was that if they could be made to realize that now when they have relations, the marital relations, they have sexual intercourse as man and woman after they're married, that becomes now a whole different thing. It becomes very different than what they were doing before. Even though they were doing the same action, it becomes now a whole different action. And that might be something she's proposing, could be a way of trying to maybe reintegrate them into the church and to see the sacramentality of what of this whole thing of marriage and the sexual act. I think part of it too is, and this is what I'm really concerns me, is that they have, as you're saying, Sister, you're saying too, they're living together, so they're having their sex, whatever. They have another person there. They have their jobs. They have their, cell phones, and they have their car, and they basically are not happy, but they kind of settle. This is the thing that concerns me. Their culture is settling for what seems to be, well, this is it. This is okay. I'm okay. I don't need anything. Why do we need church? Everything's going well. They don't really even know that there's something better. It's kind of like a student who doesn't know there's such thing as a B or an A average, but just figures a C is it's good enough. It's what else is there? Yes. Yes. Yes.
I mean, no matter what kind of culture is it, instinctive knowledge that someone is holding back.
Yes. Exactly right. The thing, yeah. Right.
And that's what I think could be in the minds of young people who say,
right,
I don't know if I'm ready.
Right.
I have to try this.
Right.
But then there's a fear. But to your point, the fear, I guess, is what I'm thinking many of them feel, is that, okay, I can have it both ways. I'm engaged, I'm making a promise to you, but I still have out.
Exactly.
It's not the total commitment.
Right.
It's the contraceptive mentality again
right.
that you started with that is still pervasive in their brain.
Right.
I can still get out of this if I really need to.
Right. And it's very what we call pragmatic, which is a very American way of thinking. It's pragmatic. It's say, well, I'll try this out. If it's not going to work, of course, then we leave. What they don't realize is that there's no way to try marriage. Marriage is like being pregnant. You either are or you're not.
Right.
Really, you either are or you're not. There's no way to pretend or try marriage because it's not marriage.
Online, I think some cohabitating couples are so indoctrinated by movies and TV that this is the way to prepare for marriage.
Yes, in fact, just the other day, I was, I saw a program on TV. There's new program. The one is called, it's the one with the, she's the counselor to the basketball player or football player.
Yeah. I forget the name of it, but she's a sports psychiatrist.
Yes. Yes, and of course it shows this relatively active or steamy scene of her in bed with a guy, and they're just so enjoying each other, and it's all smiles. It's so great, and someone else, there are a couple people were watching the show, and I asked them, I said, I just kind of came in halfway through it. I said, let me guess, is she married? No. Their father, no, they're not married. I said,
Yeah,
"Doc,
married to other people.
yeah, yeah. Her husband, I said, I just knew it. I just knew it. If you notice what they do is, like you're saying, and I point out to the people, there's a couple women watching this. I said, you know, if you notice on TV, they always show a very attractive, enjoyable sex scene. People just having so much fun, just so happy. If you notice, it's always between people who are not married. Very rarely do you see a very enjoyable, like as it is supposed to be, between people who are married. You notice that? Think about it. And then the one woman that was watching she said, well, yeah, but you understand, she had her husband walked out on her or whatever, and she felt so debilitated by that and so assaulted her femininity. Maybe she just needs this for a while, whatever. And I said, okay, I can understand that, but the problem is, here's my problem with this. It so glamorizes and makes so attractive this choice that so many people watching it, as you say, don't have the wherewithal to edit that and say, you know what, that's not right. All they see is, boy, is that attractive. I want what she has. So you're right. This culture is reinforcing it as the way, to be. It's just what you're doing. You try each other out, like a shoe before you buy it.
They think they're being responsible.
Yeah, they think they're responsible. Yeah.
It's the most responsible thing they can do, and it makes sense. There's a certain logic to it. Yeah, but I always tell the kids, so usually like to have sex before marriage because it's like test driving a car, right? And they'll go, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, no.
No.
What? And I'm like, yeah, no. This is very different.
You had.
Sight unseen.
You had.
All that is here. Well, in context of everything, they've heard all the pretty lies. Sometimes they know their lies, sometimes they don't. But you show them something else, nobody else is saying this.
Right. Right.
And then I say, is this easy? It's the hardest thing in the world. Is it worth it? Okay, I get it. This is really, really hard, but it's really, really worth it. Okay. You just keep dumbing them down and giving them.
Yeah. Right. Every day. Yeah. Yes. Every day. Right.
They need to do this every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, they do.
It's not their fault.
They hear it every day. It's right. It's.
They might have little twinges of guilt, but they don't know why.
Right. They don't know why.
There's nothing in the head.
And
nothing for their head to think about those things.
And it's a real challenge for priests or pastors, because you realize,
You're the bad guy.
Right, you got to be strong. You have to, be firm enough, at least try to show them. At the same time, realize, as you say, that they just really don't know better, and they're formed by the culture. And so, where's the balance? How do you come at them so that maybe there's still a door open in their minds, their hearts to the church after they're married? Because again, to make this attractive.
Wow, I want that. It's going to be really hard.
Right.
I want to achieve this. I want to get this.
And to answer your question, exactly right. She said it perfectly. You have to give them something that no one else is saying. They have not heard before. That hits them down in here. You notice too, between the two of them, it generally hits the woman first, the girl. You'll see her face go, oh.
The girls,
yeah, exactly. Because they.
Guys are like,
yeah, it takes
so
not so sure. I know. Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah, because again,
not all of them, but by and large, a few of the guys will be like all bright-eyed too. But
most of the time, yes, the girls, because again, in theology body, that gift of receptivity in their hearts, they know, but they're consenting to this.
They're going to get the better end of the
yeah,
deal.
they will. Yeah.
We do it this way because women always get the stick.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah.
And you're right. This respect, the women, the girls, are so hungry by nature, are so open to, in other words, their nature calls for to be respected. And when they hear that terminology, it really does touch their heart. They just never hear it. And so they're settling for this. That's what it is. They're settling for this.
You gave a beautiful talk on that Ephesians letter and the Paul's submission to your husband. We've taken it out of our church.
Yeah.
But it is to be submission to the mission of the
Yeah.
man to love.
To love us, yeah.
To love.
Yes.
Fill the love
Exactly.
of his wife.
Right.
Needs.
Exactly. See how reciprocal it is? It's totally reciprocal.
Yes, it is what John Paul is writing. It's the reciprocity of that.
Right. That's one of my favorite
Women are the beneficiaries
concepts.
of John Paul.
They really are. They really are, because they're the ones that were hurt. Remember, like he said, behind, and we all get hurt, but ultimately, but primarily for women. Behind, bless you.
God bless you. God bless you. Well, and they're being hurt today.
Great time,
They're
very
still being
good time.
hurt. They don't realize it. They're pro-choice because they're pro-women, and they're
Yes.
being hurt because they're thinking they're pro-women.
Behind, think of the scene in Genesis, the snake coming to who? The woman, and whispering in her, falling for a bad line. That's the whole nature of it. They fall for a bad line, and then they're the victim. John Paul said in I think it's in Dignitatis, Dignity of Womanhood. I think it's in that one. He said, behind the sin of every woman is the sin of a man. Yeah. I think it's in yeah. I think it's in that one. Behind the sin of every woman is the sin of a man. And look at the Garden of Eden. The serpent you can see personified in the masculine. You know, almost like a, if you straighten it out, it's a phallic. You know, really, it's that. You know, penetrate. Yeah, spousally. Sorry, I have to translate spousally. I can't help it. I think it's spousally. And you know, really, it was a, what was it? It was a penetrating thing, right? That what got into her, right? Got into her and brought her bad seed. You see how that action is? It's the same action. See what happened? So in a sense, it was a kind of a masculine force, and Adam too. Adam, by falling down or not protecting her, not whatever, he already was sinning. So the first sin, in a sense, probably was Adam. Or it was in that process, I guess you could say. It was, yeah, it was Adam not being right, because then again God comes to Adam, right? He comes to Adam and says, where were you? He didn't come to Eve at first. You notice that? He came to Adam. So, yeah, the woman is always. It's all about the woman. Sorry, but it is.
Playing a game in my mind with that scene. You can imagine the serpent going to Adam first and saying, "Oh no, you gotta talk to the lady now."
Yeah, yeah, maybe that's what happened. Yeah. That's the part that wasn't written in the Bible. Gotta talk to the lady of the house. Yeah, ask her. It had to do with shopping or something. So he said, like.
That's the story of life, the glory of love.
Yeah, it is. And
There's a new movie out. It's going to come out. Y'all got to see it. It's called Machine Gun Preacher.
oh,
I sent in my review, and I'm very much about nonviolent action. I do not like war on any shape or form. But this he's a biker, a really bad guy, for Hillbilly, Pennsylvania. So, long story short, he was got saved, became a reverend, went over to Sudan to do construction work, build orphanages, whatever, and he saw what was going on over there. That's horrific.
mm-hmm.
Slaughter and maiming, torture, kidnapping, and they turn the little kids into child soldiers, 8-year-olds,
Yeah.
sometimes they have to kill their own parents, and just horrific stuff. And he's like, no. He's really good with guns. And he joined the Sudanese, liberation army, and but he was there at the screening. And he kind of changed my mind a little bit about sometimes you have to fight violence and physically protect. And what are you going to do? Let these little kids get slaughtered? Defense little children hiding out in the woods. Their parents will send them into the woods at night because they come in and kill them. And he's like, he's not going to lose one child. This guy is so. And I'm like, he's doing what Adam didn't do.
Right.
He's putting his foot down and saying, no.
Right.
I don't care that I'm not from Africa. I don't care what your game is over here.
Yeah.
This is not going to stand. And he goes and protects his village. He's saved like about 1,000 of them already. Plus all the villagers.
Too bad. Is that true story? True story. Yeah. Yeah. Too bad the rest of the world hasn't done that.
The question is like, sometimes like, why aren't there more trans killers? Why is this guy the only one?
Yeah.
Doing it all.
Military orders. Yeah, I've read about
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like Templars.
Crusades, yeah, there's
I mean, it's a just cause. I cannot think of a more just cause than what the
right.
community is. Little defenseless children, little villagers, little innocent villagers.
Yeah, so well, anyway, we'll yeah. Yeah, that was the whole thing of the male defending, right? Exactly. And how it fell down the job. And yeah, behind every woman's sin is the sin of a man. And think about it. Think about the whole concept of abortion thing and all that. It was basically, once again, the devil through men whispering in the woman's ear, giving her a bad line. Because woman is vulnerable to it by her gift of receptivity. So if you're receptive, that means good will go in there, but also bad can get in there too. Just the nature of it, the nature of things. And the male thing is to enter into the feminine. So he can enter into with virtue, or can enter into with, deception, usury, using rather, and so on. Okay, so is anything else? Any other point? I know we're going to look at some other points too next time about that were kind of sub points in here, like we talked about. We mentioned this thing about prudery and about other issues living together that are woven in here too, that are applicable. But these are the basic terminology, kind of the basic stages, the basic terminology. And to wrap it all up, again, it's a matter of moving from the raw material and moving towards, from there, to taking the raw material as a part of moving towards an integrated love, a self-donative love, self-giving love that is between persons, always mindful of persons. And the only honest response to a person, by its nature, a person elicits love and responsibility. There's no other way to respond to a person except for love and responsibility. Really, we should respond to all things with love, but in particular, a person. Never with using, abusing. So now we move on to another hallmark work or section of John Paul, and that is his whole treatment of shame. Many of the experts on John Paul II talk about, when look at his writings and thoughts, they say that, well, one of the things that will be one of his biggest contributions is this whole analysis of shame and how he looked at that. So that's where we'll pick up now at the beginning of this new season, the metaphysics of shame, the phenomena of sexual shame and its interpretation, on page 174. On page 174, about 2/3 down, that paragraph where the italicized words are, we can then say that the phenomena of shame arises when something which of its very nature, in view of its purpose, ought to be private, passes the bounds of a person's privacy and somehow becomes public. So we're gonna see where these words come from that we use, where it says, "Have you no shame?" We have no shame. What that actually means. We're actually be more profound than we realize. John Paul II, the Carwatiwa, is going to explain to us what we really meant by that. It's been around for a while. Have you no shame? And we must have shame, but in the right way. There's a positive to shame, actually. There's a negative and a positive. And it's page 175. The essence of shame goes beyond such fear. It can only be understood if we heavily emphasize the truth that the existence of the person is an interior one. That is, that the person possesses an interior peculiarly its own, and that from that arises the need to conceal, that is, retain internally, certain experiences or values, or else a withdrawal with them into itself. Now down towards the second paragraph at the bottom, the second sentence. Particular objects of shame are those agents and organs of the body which determine its sex. Human beings show an almost universal tendency to conceal them from the gaze of others, and particularly of persons of the other sex. This largely explains the need they feel to avoid nakedness. Obviously, other motives are at work here, particularly the organism's need for protection against cold, which is more or less important in particular climates. Now, in tropical climates, tropical conditions, primitive people live in partial or total nakedness. That's a big point I use when I talk about the right way to see the body and all that. Many details in their way of life indicate that nakedness cannot be simply or unambiguously identified with shamelessness. That's a big one. One of my favorite points of his. 175, towards the bottom. Nakedness cannot be simply and unambiguously identified with shamelessness. Brothers, a naked human body is not in and itself shameless. On the contrary, for some primitive peoples, the concealment of parts of the body previously exposed is a manifestation of shamelessness. We doubtless see here the effect of habit, of a collective custom which has evolved under the influence of prevailing climate. Nakedness assists the adaptation of the organism to climatic conditions, and no other intention can easily be found in it, whereas other motives can easily be assigned to concealment of those parts of the body which distinguish male and female. You get what he's saying here? That if we came in, as oftentimes Europeans did, when they missionized, we come into like primitive cultures, in tropical, where they're naked, and we told them that's bad, so put on these clothes. That for them then brought in a foreign idea that, oh, this is bad, this is shameful. It wasn't to them before. They had no other context except it was all in context, the context of their climate. There was no other intention.
So how would you relate that to the Garden of Eden? People would say, well, see, this is just because you religious people made everybody all freak out, but there's no original sin there because they don't feel ashamed. What would you say to that? Like the shame that Adam and Eve felt, they don't feel. So that maybe they're not touched by original sin, or maybe you Christians have it all wrong.
They would feel shame in other ways. Not necessarily just by the fact that the body is naked or partially naked. They would feel shame in other contexts. There's always going to be an element of shame, because shame, as you'll see, is a protective element. As it protects from the wrong presentation or reception of the body.
When you say shame in other contexts, I'm talking about shame related to the body. So
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. They even though they're naked most of the time, whatever, I think they still would have shame in certain contexts with their bodies. Well, as you'll see too, there's also practical reasons for clothing the body. Again, on the top of 176, we find that dress may serve not only to conceal, but in one way or another to draw attention to these parts of the body. And that's another big part of my presentation I do when I talk about pornography and lust and how to see, about how styles are designed. The partially clad body is more an occasion of sin than a naked body in the right context. And that's exactly what he's saying here, because the certain clothing is designed to present the body in a lustful way. Sexual modesty cannot then in any simple way be identified with the use of clothing, nor shamelessness with the absence of clothing and total or partial nakedness. This is a secondary and variable factor. The most we can say is that a tendency to cover the body and those parts of the body which declare it male or female goes together with sexual shame, but is not an essential feature of it. And that kind of leaves us hanging, kind of like going like, what? What? Guy wrote, how did he become Pope writing like this? Didn't they must not have read this book. It would have never made him Pope. But then he tells you then you can breathe now, the next sentence. What is an essential feature is a tendency to conceal sexual values themselves, particularly insofar as they constitute in the mind of a particular person a potential object of enjoyment for persons of the other sex. See, we could not in our culture go around naked. At least not now. We'd have to probably go through some long, huge evolution of our ethos. Because it's like a sentence is saying right here. Because it constitutes in the mind of a particular person a potential object of enjoyment for persons of the other sex. In other words, we could not trust each other that our bodies would not be used potentially as simply enjoyment for the other sex. We could not in our culture trust that. So that's why we do conceal them. Not because they themselves are bad, but the sexual value would not be recognized or abused. And part of it too is because we do have to cover our bodies in our culture because of climate. So if you're not used to seeing them that way, if they're suddenly exposed, then yeah, it's going to become an occasion for potential for looking at them the wrong way. For this reason, we do not encounter sexual shame in children at an age when the sexual values do not exist for them because their minds are not yet receptive to those values. As they become conscious or are made conscious of the existence of this sphere of values, they begin to experience sexual shame, not as something imposed on them from outside by the milieu in which they live, but as interior need of an evolving personality. So suddenly realize that these parts of mine, I mean, when you're a kid, it's just like, a little boy, this is a funny way to go to the bathroom, and different than my sister, but he doesn't have the sense that there is now a value to this, a sexual value, in which now, these parts are special and they have a special meaning to them, and now they need to be treated as special.
That would be a healthy sexual shame.
Yes, a healthy, exactly, one that comes up like naturally or interiorly. The development of sexual modesty, as we call the constant capacity or readiness to feel shame, follows one course in girls and women and another in boys and men. This is connected with something which we already stressed in the psychological analysis of love, the rather different structure of the psychological forces. That's what we talked about, the sensual and the sentimental. And specifically the different relationship between sensuality and emotion in the two sexes. Now this is a great passage here. Since sensuality, which is oriented towards the body as an object of enjoyment, is in general stronger and more important in men, modesty and shame, the tendency to conceal sexual values specifically connected with the body, must be more pronounced in girls and women. Did you get that, ladies? You have to dress modestly because of how men are hardwired to see you. 176. Towards the bottom. At the same time, they are less aware of sensuality and of its natural orientation in men, because in them, emotion is usually stronger than sensuality, and sensuality tends to be latent in emotion. This is why woman is often said to be purer than man. This tells us nothing about the virtue of chastity. Woman is pure inasmuch as she experiences more powerfully the value of a human being of the other sex, the value of a sort of psychological masculinity. She is, it is true, greatly influenced by physical masculinity, although the feminine reaction to both forms of masculinity is primarily psychological. But this very trait in her mentality may, in a certain sense, make modesty more difficult for her. This is such a great, great insight. This is like one of these things where people would accuse, they'd say about him that he had to have been married, he had to have been screwing around. How can he know this stuff so well? Which is exactly the question that brings us to the threshold that we need to cross. He knows it so well and better than people who have been screwing around because it is of God and he is a man of God. He knows the most about sexuality in the greatest details because sexuality is of God. This is the proof. How would this man who never had it know this more than people who do have sex constantly? That proves it right here that sexuality is of God. And that's the threshold we have to cross. I remember my own father asking about this. He was reading some of my stuff on some of my articles. He goes, Tom, he's 85, you know. He's just, I gotta read your articles twice to understand them. And this Pope, I mean, he's a celibate. How would he know about this stuff? See, that's a class. He would come from a generation that would think that, no, you know, Pope, celibacy, holiness over here, sexuality over here. You know, we don't talk about it. You know, they don't connect. You know, you can live it quietly, privately, you know, purely here. But this over here doesn't deal with that. You know, the celibates don't deal with that. They stay above it. No. Both and. Especially the celibates deal with it. Because they're dealing more directly with God.
I think there's a lot of other explanations too. He counseled young married couples. He's a professor and he's from Texas with students and he married them and they come to him with their problems. And also he has a body. We all have bodies.
Yeah. And he would think about it.
Yeah, we have imagination. You know, duh.
I just imagine John Paul. You know, he was.
He wanted to be an actor,
Yeah.
playwright.
Yeah.
Good one. You know, surely writing the stories of life in his
Yes,
drama.
exactly. He's in touch with life. He was immersed in life, and this is life. And life, of course, is ultimately defined by God. So, as I always say, why was John Paul II great? Why was he a saint? Because he was so human. He was simply such a natural human, a normal human. He was immersed completely into human drama. There's not one, I don't think it was one bit of the human drama he did not experience in this life. And always connected with God. Okay. She is, it is true, greatly influenced by atheism. Okay. But this very trait in her mentality may in a certain sense make modesty more difficult for her. For since a woman does not find in herself that sensuality which a man as a rule cannot but be aware in himself, she does not feel so great a need to conceal the body as a potential object of enjoyment. This is the great line. The evolution of modesty in woman requires some initial insight into the male psychology. Yeah, 177. The last line of the top paragraph. I have it underlined about 10 times. The evolution of modesty in a woman requires some initial insight into the male psychology. There is, you can see, you can hear the echoes of what will become that big question of John Paul. The fundamental question is, who is man for woman? Who is woman for man? In other words, how do we understand each other truly as man and woman? And it's interesting that he has this insight that for the girls, it is harder for them to conceal because they don't have that same experience of the sensual reaction. It's more the sentimental. They do have it, but it's more the sentimental. And so this is when we teach girls, we can help them understand it. It's not because, you know, we're trying to be mean, you know, we want you to look like a frump instead of being stylish, whatever, you know. You have to understand how we're made as man and woman. You know, it's a mutual thing. The man's, and this is what Christopher West talks about a lot, you know, and he does on these topics. He says it's not that just the age-old thing of men can cuss the eyes, look away. Because if we really wanted to be totally pure of heart, men should put on blindfolds and keep them on 24 hours a day. Then you'll be totally pure. You will never see ever anything that will tempt you. If you follow that, think about it, if you follow that line, why stop there? Or women can wear burqas, precisely. Precisely. Yeah, really. Oh, burqas.
You know, this summer, my son, who's 24, I just talked about him, he's not here. But he came in with a girlfriend, and she was wearing those hot short
Yeah.
23 or 21. And I just said, you're not going to go to church now.
Yes.
And her face just, I don't believe you just said it, because she was
Right.
looking for, you know, affirmation and
Yes.
love and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but I just said, oh, you're not going to go to church like that. And then my son Michael saw her face, and he said, you look just perfectly fine.
Whoa.
And oh my, I just, you know what, I gave up. I gave up. There's no,
Well, he just didn't finish the sentence. You look perfectly fine for our wedding night.
in bed, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think along with this is also what I believe is the root feminist error is that we're not different.
Yes. Yes. Which
And
is,
so on top of everything, I have a right to wear what I want to wear and blah,
right.
blah, blah. And
It's just, pretending there's no difference. There's none of it. It's total, it's wanton,
we're not
willful
different. So
ignorance
because
of this.
a woman isn't thinking anything bad, even when she sees a guy in shorts maybe or something, he's not thinking bad thoughts about me. Oh yeah? You're making it really hard because there's no gender difference.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly.
We're the same on the
Right.
inside. We're making everything on the
Yes,
inside.
and you
That's
see,
a real
exactly. We're making everything gender neutral. And this is why, and going back to TV programs, every single one of them is doing it. You know how many new programs are on TV that star women like never before, and they're always portrayed acting like men. You know, they're the top cop, kick butt. You know, there's this latest one now that just have, you know, because it doesn't matter. No, you're just like a man, being just like a man. And see, there was a Father David Knight once wrote a book on something about sex, whatever. And he was a priest. He was talking about. He's had a couple of books over the years. He was bigger a few years ago, but he had this line. I remember reading it. This was years ago before Theology Body came out. I was always into Theology Body stuff, so I would read and look at any source I could. David Knight, and I came across his book. It was something like Good News of Sex or whatever. And in there he said this line. He said that girls have to understand. He actually used it. It's a tough line, but when you think about it, he said, in a sense, when they dress immodestly or provocatively, it's almost like a reverse rape. In other words, you have intruded into a man. It says the man did not want in this moment to suddenly grapple now with the temptation to lust versus purity of heart. You impose it on him by playing into his vulnerability. In other words, you like a rape, you entered into his psyche in a way that he did not ask for or want. But now he has to deal with it. This is what the ladies don't understand. They think that guys are always in this state, they're always looking for this. No, they don't want to be bothered by this struggle most of the time, especially virtuous men. But they're continually, in a sense, being raped. It's being put onto them, and it's not like, and because of the way the men are hardwired, they automatically have to deal with this. It's not like, oh, this doesn't affect me, you know. It's like bang. It's like, oh shoot, now I gotta you know. And they're busy doing their thing. And bang, here comes this thing, you know. It is, and it's in sense of a certain intrusiveness by the female onto the male psyche that is unwanted. So I thought that was a very interesting point. He said it years ago, and I think, and that's basically what he's saying here in his own philosophical words. I told you this season is going to really be, it's going to be awesome. Really, we're really going to get into it's an absolute manual on the how-to and relationships and the deep psyche and everything that's going on. We'll get into some even really more astounding stuff as we go on. But this whole thing on shame is going to be very important. It's one of the defining things of John Paul II. and all of his work is this whole thing of shame. So we'll spend some time on this. It's very important. Shame and dress, nudity, all this. Gosh, so many good things. Okay, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to, let's see if we can go to, okay, yeah, bottom of 177. Shame is not only response to someone else's sensual and sexual reaction to the body as an object of use, a reaction to a reaction. It is also, above all, an imminent need to prevent such reaction to the body in oneself, because they are incompatible with the value of the person. This is the origin of modesty, which is a constant eagerness to avoid what is shameless. Okay, so shame, like shame on you. Okay, there's a shame. There's a negative to it. Like we're embarrassed. We feel bad about something. But the positive is shame. Shame comes in. With Adam and Eve. They looked at each other and they were ashamed. But he said the redeeming value of it now is that it protects now. It protects those parts that ought to be more concealed, that are more vulnerable, more precious. It's shame that inspires us to do that. Cover up, not because they're bad, but because they're so special. And it wasn't that way before. Of course, before original sin.
I read this article recently about a woman, she's a writer, she's a New York Times, she's living in Paris, and you never go out on the street, which is bad. Like, even if you have to run down the store for a carton of eggs, you always dress up. And she, being the American she was in her sweatpants, and she was running down the street, and everyone's like looking at her horrified. And she met this man that she knew all dressed like him. What are you doing? And she said, I just have to go. I know I shouldn't do this. And she said something like, I can dress whatever way I want. This is my neighborhood. I live here. And he goes, yes, you can, but you shouldn't. And she said the men and women like dress for each other. Even if you're not married, it's like you dress up to be like a woman for the men, and the men dress up like for the women. It's sweet. It's like a courtesy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something we can learn from this.
There is. When I was a little boy, my dad worked, my mother didn't. It was 1950s, stay at home mom and all that stuff. And I remember I would notice the pattern in her every day. And I asked her one day, the pattern was, as we got kind of towards supper time, the later part of the afternoon, she would go and clean up and put on a dress. And I actually asked her, Mom, why do you dress up all the time in the afternoon? And she was in the kitchen, and she said, very simply, she said, because your father's coming home. And that's what she did. He's coming home. I will present meal, just as you said. It wasn't provided. It was just right. She cleaned up. She put on. That's all she had. Because your father's coming home.